Good evening, everyone. Good evening. We're so happy to have you all here tonight. Thanks for coming out despite the weather. Hope everyone did okay last night. I'm Jenny Cole. I'm the Director of Collections Access here at the Folsom Historical Society. Thank you again for joining us tonight for Forever Belle, Sallie Ward of Kentucky. A few quick housekeeping items. We'll have a Q&A session at the conclusion of the program, and I will pass a microphone around so everyone can hear your question from the audience. And if you're joining us virtually, please feel free to put a question in the chat, and that will come to me, and I can ask that as well. Please also remember to silence your cell phone. I'm going to do it myself. There we go, for the duration of the program. Thanks, you all. It is my honor and privilege to introduce tonight's speaker. I particularly enjoy it when folks who have done research with us here at the Filson come in and give a lecture. It brings it very full circle for me. I've been doing reference here on and off for about 20 years. So it's wonderful tonight for me to have met our speaker, who I've been emailing with for several years, Randolph Paul Runyon. He's an emeritus professor at Miami University of Ohio and the author of Ghostly Parallels, Robert Penn Warren and the Lyric Poetic Sequence, Order and Disorder, Intratextual Symmetry in Montaigne's Essays, and the Assault on Elisha Green, Race and Religion in a Kentucky Community. So without any further ado, welcome to Randy.
Thank you so much. I finally figured out who Jenny Cole is. As you said, we've been corresponding. It was during COVID and the museum was closed, but that was an advantage because I lived an hour and a half away anyway. And it was possible for me to ask her to look up items, and a number of personal letters and manuscripts, personal letters by people that knew Sallie at the time, that she found them for me, and they found their way into the book. So I couldn't have done it without her. I'm going to start with what you see, which is George Peter Alexander Healy, Healy. He's the painter of Sallie Ward. And this was in 1860 in New Orleans in his studio. She was born in 1827, so she was in her 30s. And he also painted several other members of her family, including her parents. And some of them are in my book. And they're all here in Louisville at the Speed Museum. So thanks to their gracious cooperation, I'm able to put that in the book. In the spring of 1860, her father, she had 7 siblings, by the way. Her father, Robert Johnson Ward, engaged the painter Healy to paint at least 7 pictures of the Ward family in the artist's New Orleans studio at a combined cost of at least $2,800. I calculate that from the fact that there is still extant a price list, depending on size of a portrait from Healy. And some are $450 and it goes up to like $1,200, depending on how big. Sallie, at this time in her early 30s, had lost some of her youthful glow, but was still of striking appearance. Her cousin through her mother, they had the same the mother, well, cousin through her mother. Margaret Johnson Irwin commented, her portrait by Healy is very pretty, but it seems to simper. I'm not sure how to simper myself, but I've seen people do that. Someone else writing about the paintings that Healy did in New Orleans alludes to the Sallie's impish, I-M-P-I-S-H, impish qualities and coquettishness. Healy, he wrote, captured the malapertness, I hadn't seen that word in a while, of the successful social hostess in the tilt of the head, the knowing glance, and the skillfully artless clasp of the hands. The painter relied on paintings of yard goods, such as the moire and re-embroidered lace of the gown and damask of the table covering to create an extraordinary visual richness, as French painters such as Ingres had done in the preceding decade. Healy said that Sallie was the most beautiful and the most exquisite woman I have ever painted. He said that to people who would visit him in Paris, France, not the Paris I'm from, where he had made a copy of the painting. He would show it off. A letter in the Filson archives, and this is what I was alluding to earlier, gives us a glimpse of how she may have looked 15 years earlier in her heyday. Henry Clay Pendell wrote to John C. Bullitt, December 28, 1845, "By George, when Sallie Ward's face is in repose, she is the most perfect beauty I ever saw. Lord, what would I have given to have kissed her for about an hour?" All over. The face, of course. I went with her one night to a concert, and I don't think I took my eyes off her during the whole thing. Next picture. See if this works. Yes. The Ward Mansion, northeast corner of Walnut and 2nd Streets. And I think 2nd Street is Muhammad Ali now. Or the Walnut is, sorry. Okay. An artist named Timothy Pack, who is from Lexington, drew this for me from a couple of newspaper photographs that were too blurry to reproduce in the book. So I had him do that for the book. And it's a little inexact in that there was a portico, kind of a porch, but he and I could not figure out what style it would be in. And besides, when her brother, Matt Ward, in 1853, murdered his brother's schoolteacher, and a crowd of 12,000 people attacked the house, the portico was destroyed. So this is what it looks like in the aftermath, maybe, of the crowd. Sallie's beauty flourished in a privileged setting, for her father was one of the wealthiest men in the state. The mansion that housed Mr. and Mrs. Robert Johnson Ward and their 8 offspring, together with its stables, slave quarters, and park-like grounds, occupied the northeast corner of the intersection of Walnut and 2nd Streets. The building was made for entertaining. Now, it's not much to look at on the outside, you know, but on the inside, yes. And Ward had supervised its design. Hundreds of guests could mill about and not feel crowded. It had 3 parlors in a row, one behind the other. 20 by 22 feet in size, the parlors, connected by folding doors. From the 3rd, glass doors open onto yet another room, a greenhouse. And beyond that, a conservatory with palms and camellias, and in the center, a pyramid of rare flowers reaching to the ceiling. Nearby was an aviary with 100 caged birds, let loose at intervals to drink from the pool and the fountain constantly flowing through a miniature castle made of tin. For luncheons, tables of massive mahogany were brought in with silver plate and cut glass, together with rounds of mutton, whole turkeys, sirloins of beef, saddles of venison, pyramids of oranges, grapes, and macaroons, all beneath a spun candy web. Wine flowed like water. Here is her father. To maintain this lifestyle cost Mr. Ward $50,000 a year, multiplied by 30 to get a sense of what it's worth now, equivalent to $1.5 million today. Born in 1798 in Scott County, he was descended through his mother, Sallie Johnson Ward, from a wealthy and powerful family. His maternal grandparents were Robert and Jemima Suggett Johnson. You probably heard of Jemima Suggett. Legend had it for a long time that she was the chief among the women that bravely went at the siege of Bryan Station and got water, even though the Indians were right there. In fact, whoops, there they are. It's funny, it looks like an ancient Greek something or other. While the enemy subsequently shot blazing arrows into the fort, but the water saved the day. They needed to put out the fire. There we go. Now, Sallie in the market house, as imagined by Edwin Fitch, who was a columnist and cartoonist for the, I think, the Courier Journal, unless it was one of the other local papers in the 1940s. No account of Sallie Ward is complete without the tale of her riding a horse through Louisville's market house, upsetting fruits and vegetables and sending sellers and buyers fleeing for safety. Someone could have been seriously hurt by those galloping hoofs. The building had been erected in the middle of a street that had openings at both ends, a tempting target for a spirited young woman approaching on horseback. The story, as historian Thomas D. Clark remarked, is one that Kentuckians had not yet ceased telling. So we've told it again. Another Sallie story has her riding up the front steps of the Galt House, a prominent hotel in Louisville, and into the lobby, whirling her horse about and making him bow to the startled guests. Eugene Field, author of Wink and Blink and Nod, remember him from your childhood, told it as fact in a Chicago newspaper, but it may have been as fantastical as his poem. A Louisville correspondent for the New York the New York World in 1885 termed it a legend, suggesting it did not happen, but did nevertheless identify every member of the accompanying four friends, leaving some ambiguity as to whether it was true or not. As a further instance of her ability to make mischief, we could note that Sallie and a friend once disguised themselves as beggars and so played upon the credulity of her parents that she prevailed on them to give her a goodly sum of money. They did not recognize her. While attending a private girls' school in Philadelphia, one day she put on a man's clothes and showed up among her fellow students in a place where only females were allowed. The girls screamed and fled. She laughed, told them to come back, and they did, noting how handsome she looked in male attire. Sallie spent 2 years at that school, graduating in 1844 at the age of 17. She did not make a habit of cross-dressing, though in 1845, an observer noted that our fashionable ladies in Louisville are all using canes and learning to smoke cigars in emulation of Sallie Ward. This is one of the letters I got from the Philston archives, adding that it was the latest touch in Paris because Amandine Lucille Aurore Dupin, writing under the name George Sand or Georges Sand, I'm not sure how it was pronounced, set the style in France, and Sallie may have introduced it into Kentucky. This is a drawing from, I think, the Ladies' Home Journal, 1901. A rather well-known at the time female illustrator did it. I think it's very nice. What is going on? This soldier, closest one to me on his horse, looks like he's almost in prayer. And it looks like it could be in front of her house, or with the illustrator imagined to be her house. She had no way of knowing because she was not from here. And there's Sallie on her horse. What's going on? Well, there are two events, and this it's not the first one, but the second one that this illustrates. I'll make it clear. On the morning of Saturday, May 23rd, 1846, a stirring ceremony was enacted in front of the Ward residence. It's not this, but it's the year before. Sallie presented on behalf of the women of the city of Louisville an American flag to the Louisville Guards, a company of volunteers leaving for the Mexican-American War, who had been marched from their boat across town for the purpose. As Helen Dice Irvin remarked, Sallie had a shrewd sense of stagecraft and played her part to perfection. There was scarcely a dry eye in the vast throng of soldiers and friends who had come to bid farewell as the youthful daughter of Mr. Ward appeared with a beautiful silken flag bearing the stars and stripes. 2 days later, on the riverbank at Portland, in the western part of Louisville, she presented to the Louisville Legion, also headed for Mexico, a regimental banner. I said 2 events, actually 3 events. So this is this is the second of the 3. This takes place in Portland, I think. Also headed for Mexico, a regimental banner, this one designed and made at her own expense, as opposed to have been made by the ladies of Louisville, the young ladies of Louisville. As those brave fellows marched by the open carriage in which I sat, Sallie recalled in later years, each one lifting his hat to me, it was the proudest moment of my life. I esteemed the honor of being selected to present the flag, or the banner in this case, to these noble sons of Kentucky, far greater than all the homage of a ballroom. On June 11th, a soldier wrote from Texas, "We have with us the beautiful flag." So there were 2 flags. There was a regimental banner that she designed, and then there was Old Glory. The beautiful flag presented to our company by Miss Ward, and we'll carry it with us wherever we go. It shall never be captured or disgraced as long as one man is left to fight in its defense under its glorious folds. A correspondent wrote from Monterrey, Mexico, on February 27th, 1847, so a year into the war, a year later. "If we are attacked here and come off victorious, we cannot fail, Miss Ward may well claim the credit of the victory, for under her banner we cannot fail to conquer." The regimental banner she gave them, made of green silk with heavy gold embroidery, was a bit impractical as it proved too heavy to carry in parades, much less in battle. As for the American flag, she also presented, it had so faded from constant use that its red stripes had become invisible. The paymaster's wife took the matter in hand, replacing the stripes with strips cut from a red petticoat. Now, we finally get to this picture. When the soldiers returned to Louisville on May 27th, 1847, they marched through the city to Robert Ward's house to return the honored emblems. She welcomed them atop her horse as she had been just about to go out for a ride. Moving on. Bigelow, or Timothy Bigelow Lawrence of Boston, Sallie's husband, well, first husband. As my wife likes to joke, it was a starter marriage. Sallie had many suitors, and some of them fought duels for her, and one of them died, according to a correspondent from Alabama in the 1880s. But somehow T. Bigelow Lawrence won over the rest. It's hard to imagine why, except his wealth. But she was wealthy, so she didn't need it. She met him in 1846 on a visit to Saratoga Springs. On the plus side, he was wealthy. On the minus, he was deaf and nearsighted. Poor guy. He had some illness when he was at Harvard as an undergraduate, and he lost most of his hearing, not entirely all. His father, a self-made millionaire, owned cotton mills and was about to be named ambassador, and was, to England. The wedding took place in Louisville, in that house I showed you before, in early December 6, 1848. There were 500 guests, spilling into 3 parlors, one behind the next. The supper was served in the conservatory with its massive pyramid, supported by 22 cherubim, perhaps alluding to Sallie's being in her 22nd year, 21, in her 22nd year. The pyramid was surmounted with a vase diffusing clouds of incense. The one sour note reported was that while Sallie's dress was a wondrously expensive import from Paris, France, and her mother and bridesmaids were arrayed in the latest fashion, The puritanical mother of the groom wore a plain dress trimmed with cotton lace and mock pearls. The Wards, that Sally's parents, were shocked and insulted. It was a contrast between Kentucky elegance and New England austerity. And that was the story of her marriage, for she had a penchant for wearing rouge, which was not common practice and was noticed as an oddity, in fact, a scandal. Once she was walking down a street in Louisville, and the workman was there, and he saw her, and he said, "By God, painted," as in a painted lady. And she said, "Yes, painted by God," which is strange since that was not true, but this rouge wearing was a problem for the Lawrences at Timothy Bigelow. It wasn't done in Boston. Bigelow's mother told him to make Sallie stop. Sally's mother told Sallie, "Seem to obey, but do as you please." And I love this: "Sallie, be a woman. Like, be a man." Bigelow's mother was scandalized as well by Sally's wearing an Oriental costume at a ball that included Turkish white satin pantalets and that resembled what she wore in August 1846 at Newport, Rhode Island, which created a sensation across the country when it was reported on fashion pages in various newspapers. Newspapers copied each other, and the telegraph having now been firmly invented and in place, they could easily copy each other. And of course, they also copied each other because they sent each other subscriptions. So you're always reading newspapers of copied with, credit from another newspaper. So it enabled her to become famous for various things. There would be other things later, but this might have been the first thing. Her cousin, whom I quoted earlier, commented, this is Margaret Johnson Urban, "Sallie Ward's only sensible act took place during the early days of her marriage to Timothy Bigelow Lawrence and showed that a woman in pants is sometimes more effectual than a man with or without." She was a card. Her letters are fabulous. Writing, at the time from Mississippi. There's a book that reprints them. It's called Like Some Green Laurel. And I recommend it if you can find it, a little thin book. "Her behavior was scandalous, yet I cannot help," continuing the quotation, "I cannot help but laugh when I think of those pinch-mouthed old witch hunters' expressions when she appeared in satin bloomers, a turban, and pounds of jewels." The chilly reception Bigelow's parents gave her costume was not, however, what made her pack her bags for home. Her departure was prompted by something more serious. The newly married pair were staying at a Massachusetts seashore hotel when one blustery evening, Sallie declined her husband's invitation to go for a carriage ride in an open carriage because she was too thinly dressed for the weather, cold ocean breezes and all that. So he went without her. A little later, two lady friends of hers came by, accompanied by a gentleman who, the son of who ran the Galt House, and a brother to Colin Throckmorton, who and a couple of years later eloped with Sallie's beautiful sister Malvina. But I have a chapter on that, but you don't have time to get into it tonight. Given the story that came out after his death in 1881 to the effect that he was so in love with Sallie that he followed her to Boston, even though, she was married. The three invited Sallie to go for a ride. She at first declined, but changed her mind when it was pointed out to her that she wouldn't get cold because it was a closed carriage. As chance would have it, Bigelow, driving by in his carriage, spotted her as the carriage went by, sitting next to a man and two ladies. He forced them to halt, pulled open the door, and ordered Sallie out. She refused. While they were arguing, the other man, who I think is John Throckmorton, slipped away unnoticed, got into Bigelow's vehicle, and drove off, forcing Bigelow to return to the hotel with Sallie and her female companions. According to a Louisville acquaintance, the story goes, when he got her to the hotel, he locked her in a room, gave her a good shaking, and boxed her ears. They returned to Boston the next day, where she telegraphed her father to come for her immediately. This was in August of 1849. When Mr. Ward reached Boston, he found his daughter all packed and ready to go. They left for Louisville the next morning, which was August 18th. Back in Kentucky, now that she's returned, left her husband in Boston, her health, which she had been complaining about because Boston was just too cold for her, was improving wonderfully. October 7th, she wrote a letter with news of the social scene in Louisville. A fancy ball was to be given where she would appear as a Circassian slave, and her beautiful new dress was ready. She wrote, "Louisville has been extremely gay. We have had masquerades, fancy balls, tableaux, and parties." Tableaus, where they would kind of do a freeze in position like a painting. You've seen, not in person, but you've heard of that sort of thing. That was quite the rage. Kind of theater that doesn't move. A Louisville acquaintance wrote of Sallie that, she's not even divorced. She's still married, has lots of beaux, is B-E-A-U-X, is as great a belle as ever, entering into all kinds of folly, just as desirous to be admired as formerly. Another letter writer commented, "Sallie Ward is still flourishing." This is a woman writing. "Very peculiar, is it not? It seems to me that if I had a husband, I should like to see him now and then, at any rate, for fear I would forget I was married and fall in love with someone else. But she seems to be very well pleased without him." That's a letter I got from the Filson. Thanks to COVID, it just came in the mail. Great service. Sallie needed a divorce. Bigelow Lawrence unwittingly made it easier for her to obtain one. The next year, February 28th, 1850, they were married December 6, 1848. They arrived in Boston. It took them until March or April 49 to get to Boston, where his parents were. And then it was in August that the episode at the beach happened, and she went home, August of 49. So here we are at February 28, 1850. The Louisville Courier newspaper posted the following notice: "Whereas my wife, Sallie W. Lawrence, has willfully and without cause deserted me, this is to caution all persons against harboring or trusting her on my account, as I hold myself responsible for no debts contracted by her." I used to read these in the paper at Maysville in the 50s. I never quite figured what it was all about. It was always the same formula: I will be responsible for no debts other than my own. Now I realize it was, a divorce in the making, as a guess. So he was treating her as a master might a runaway apprentice or even slave. It was an outrage, and Kentuckians treated it as such. Sallie's father enlisted influential friends, including Louisville Journal editor George D. Prentice, to prevail upon the legislature, of which he had once been a member and in fact was the Speaker of the House. When Sallie was just a little girl, or even before she was born. So, he knew his way around Frankfurt. And the legislature was on the eve of adjourning, so they had to get there quickly to get them to pass a law, to make a law that made the unnecessary publishing of one party in a newspaper for alleged abandonment a sufficient ground for decreeing a divorce. They were laying the groundwork. Prentice and lawyer Nathaniel Wolfe rode relays of fast horses to the state capitol, 3 of whom supposedly died of exhaustion. The horses, not Wolfe and Prentice. They went before the lawmakers and demanded that such an insult to Kentucky womanhood be expunged, and it was done. Then, so we have grounds for divorce. In June 1850, a Louisville jury granted her a divorce, and they, stepped on each other's toes trying to be the first to sign. They refused to go upstairs and consider it, as juries are supposed to do. We know what we want. They want to give her a divorce, so they did. Now, what happened was, that was in June 50, her mother decided to celebrate by holding a masquerade ball at their big mansion. So she did on September 25th. And you can read how everyone came and what costume they had. And what's interesting is I wanted proof that she actually rode her horse through the market house. Remember that story earlier? I think I found proof that at least the story was out that she had at about the time. You know, the time would have been 1846, 47, 48, 49, somewhere in there. It was, well, she probably would have done it when she's 46, when she's like not yet getting married. Anyway, this article has the following passage. Fashionable life in Louisville and the West. Now, you note that this wasn't the South, this was the West. And she wasn't a Southern belle, she was a Western belle. Thanks to our modern age, I have, hundreds of newspapers that I can access by subscribing to different services. And I can, you can't prove a negative really, but I traced where the term Southern belle appeared and when. And that is as applicable to Sallie. If they're talking about Sallie, do they call her a Southern belle or something else? Well, they called her a Western belle until the Civil War. And then you had kind of greater consciousness of being Southern or not. So Southern belle became more and more frequent. I mean, it was frequent before, but not applied to Sallie. So anyway, fashionable life in Louisville and the West compared to that of Boston and down east is as irreconcilable as fire and water. Louisville and the West are free, unrestrained, go-aheadative. Boston and down east are shackled, conventional, and slow coachy. One would dash through a marketplace in a feminine way and only stop to pay a fine of $20, which was the fine she paid, and be off again. The other would walk as demurely as a Quaker. And so, a typical woman from the East, a typical woman from the West. So it's East versus West. And it was Sallie versus, someone from Boston. So there we have an allusion to Sallie in particular, paying the fine for having ridden her horse through the market. That makes me think it happened. It is noteworthy that let me skip ahead. And I looked at my watch and I'm shocked that I'm going way too slow. And I think what I therefore should do is just look at the pictures and speak at less length. Okay, so there is husband number one. Now, I was asked by some gracious person here, oh, I hope you talk about her brother who killed the school teacher. And voila. So this is from a newspaper at the time. It is Gilmore's gun store. And Robert, who was a year older, not Robert, Matthew, was a year older than Sallie. He was a very interesting creature. He went to Harvard. He went to Europe twice and wrote a book about each of the two voyages that was published in New York. The first one's rather good, and the second one less so. The second one, he seemed to have gotten angry. It's about England, and he just said nothing but insulting things about the British. And he published those letters in Prentice's Louisville Journal newspaper, and they were long enough to become a book. That is the first one. And the school teacher had taught it was teaching the two younger brothers, William and Victor. I think they were twins. I think both born in 49. And William came home from school and one day and was weeping and crying and angry and said, he beat me. in front of all the other students. He punished me with a piece of leather that he's hit my leg on 6 times. Apparently, mainly hit the boot and not the flesh, but all the other students thought, well, we've all been through that. I mean, we've all been punished, you know, that corporal punishment was a thing. You couldn't keep order otherwise. Matt had earlier defended or tried to kill, knocked on the door of another school teacher, like a few years before, that the other little brother had complained about getting punishment from. So Matt was this incredibly violent person, but he didn't act it out, except this one occasion. And it seems that his mother kind of urged him to defend the family honor. And so he went to the school the next day in the morning. But first he stopped and bought 2 of those derringers, put one in each of his pants pockets. And he walked into the school during a class and tried to pick a fight with the school teacher so that he would have an excuse to say, well, he hit me first, so forth. And the most the school teacher did was put his hand on his shoulder, saying, now, don't get upset. And he took that, you know. So, and he shot him. And he died that night, the school teacher. And it was a terrible thing. And even more terrible was that he got off because his father had the money to hire Crittenden and other people, like 13 lawyers. And the trial is very interesting to read. There are 3 accounts of it, 2 rather foolish and fulsome, you know, complete, and the other one fragmentary. It took place with a change of venue in Elizabethtown in Hardin County in April of 1854. The thing had occurred November 2nd, 53. And he got off on grounds of self-defense, which, you know, absurd. But money talks. But it kind of destroyed the reputation of the family. I'm just going to flip through slides and be quick. I said I was going to do that. But I had to give you a little sense of why I have that up there. And this is Edwin Fitch, who did the cartoon in the Louisville paper of her riding through the market house. Here he did one of him shooting the school teacher. The one thing Fitch gets, or Finch, I forget, Fitch or Finch, gets wrong is that he makes the school teacher bald and like at least middle-aged, if not elderly. But actually, he was only 5 months older than Matt. And this school teacher his name was Butler, had gone to Europe about the same time that Matt had and written about it, letters that were published in the Louisville Courier, which was the competing paper for Prentice's journal. And so how strange that they would have that much in common. But after the trial actually his brother, older brother, Matt's older brother, Robert, played a role. You can see him to the upper left holding back the students, holding a knife. You probably can't see it, it's too tiny. Yeah, but that really happened while he shot the teacher. So they won the trial in April and they returned to Louisville, and people in Louisville are very upset. And 12,000 gathered in front of City Hall and passed resolutions condemning them. And several thousand then went to the House. Those people hanging on a telegraph pole are not dead, they're effigies, they're not people. But they did hang Matt and his brother and one of the lawyers for Matt on in effigy. And then the fire, the flames, they're, you know, attacking the house, and the front porch caught on fire. And I think the thing I didn't draw because I didn't know what form it was, the little portico, was destroyed, but the house was saved. The firemen came, although I think the conservatory windows were broken. So this was a big deal. And I really wanted to tell you this little anecdote. because it has a Filson connection. Number one, it was from a letter that was in the Filson archives that was kindly made available to me. But the other is that I'm not sure it's, true, but it's certainly fascinating. And that is that the crowd were attacking the house and they wanted to kill the perpetrator, who was Matt. And he took off. Prentice, the newspaper editor, got on his horse and got out of town because he was associated with him in the popular mind. And according to this letter written by a descendant of someone who lived across the street from there in 1948, sent to someone who'd given a talk I'm not sure at the Filson, but I think it was on Butler, said that what he was told was that they got a hearse and a funeral procession and put Matt in the coffin and drove the funeral carriage out to near West Point to escape. So this is Sallie's mother, also Matt's mother, and she's a very strong person. And she's the one who said to Sallie, "Be a woman. Seem to obey, but do what you want." Here, painting of Matt. I should close with this. This is also by Healy, done in the spring of 1860 in New Orleans. Look, his face is all reddish, I think he was feverish. He was always ill from something. The 25 years after the event, well, first, in 1862, Matt retreated. He couldn't come back to Louisville. He tried several times, but people kept saying, "We'll kill him as soon as he steps off the boat." He went to a plantation in Arkansas on the Mississippi that his mother owned. And he stayed there several years raising cotton, having like 50 slaves. And Civil War comes, and in 1862, in September, he just happened to be, well, the Union, the Confederate guerrillas were trying to kidnap his slaves to make them work on some fortification. And they approached his house, his plantation house in Arkansas, and he came out on the porch to see what was the matter, and unfortunately, he was wearing a blue coat. And the Confederates later said, "Well, we thought he was a Union officer, so we shot him." The funny thing is that, that's kind of funny too, but depending on your sense of humor or your sense of irony, but Matt, it later developed, was very afraid that he was going to be killed because nearby there was a company of Union soldiers from Illinois, from where the University of Illinois is. It was a normal school, that is a teaching school. And almost all of these Union soldiers from Illinois were teachers. And he thought they were going to take revenge on him for killing the teacher, Butler. And he was actually afraid. So, he died a scared man. There's a scene in 25 years after all of this when this is Matt's wife. I think she's very, very, very beautiful. And she was at the trial in April of 54. And she was described as the weeping girl wife of Matt. They'd been married 6 months before that. She was the daughter of a riverboat captain named Peyton Key. But back to this. The interviewed a quarter century later, but 1883 or so, in Louisville, Anna Key Ward gave her version of what happened. She's a widow now. They were living on the plantation. This is her talking. Well, no, it's not. Near Helena, which is a town in Arkansas on the river. And Matt's father was with them. When Confederate cavalry commander Archibald Dobbins, who lived 2 miles from the wards, learned that the Union soldiers were picking Matt's cotton for him, the Confederates came sweeping down with a strong force of guerrilla cavalry. They drove off the Northern troops. This is his wife talking, and were seizing the slaves to carry them within the Confederate lines. We heard firing one morning during the raid, and my husband went out to see what the trouble was. He had just walked off the porch into the yard when a slave came riding furiously up to the gate and ran to my husband. He was from the plantation of our cousin, Tom Johnson, and was pursued by a squad of guerrillas. Seeing Matt, whom he knew well, he fled to him, begging for protection. The guerrillas were firing fast as they pursued him and continued it as he ran to my husband. My husband was wounded, as was the slave. We took him to Helena, not thinking his wound was dangerous, but in a few days he died. And she's talking to a reporter from Louisville paper. And as the reporter stood up to leave after like a half hour, an hour of tea and sympathy and her telling her story, she called his attention to an oil painting over the mantel, and it's this very painting. It doesn't look like the face of a bad man, does it? She said. So ask you to judge for yourself. The reporter wrote that the face of the portrait was a high, refined type with an almost oriental cast of features, a light beard and mustache, clear eyes, and countenance lit up with intelligence. It brought to mind the pictures the old masters have painted of Christ. So I'm going to run quickly through because these pictures are too good not to show. This is Sallie's only child, John Wesley Hunt, born in 1857. And very precious because she had 2 previous ones who had died. This is when she was living in New Orleans with her second husband, Robert Pearson Hunt, who was a doctor, who went to the Confederacy. Well, she remained. Okay, this is Sallie's 3rd husband, Venerando Pulitza Armstrong, or Veen, as he was known. I think of him as, I forget who's the character in Gone with the Wind, who she marries for money. Huh? Yeah, Frank, I think, yeah. Because, you know, he's not handsome, but he's got the bucks. And she had lost a lot of her money in the Civil War, and she was desperate. So in 1876, she marries him. But there, let me get back. This is her next husband, George Downs, and his descendants are here somewhere. I met them. Ah, there they are. He was born in Indiana, I think, right? And he lived with her in the Galt House from 1885 or so until her death in 1896. This is a tombstone in Cave Hill that she had designed for husbands 2 and 3. She didn't do one for her 4th one because he outlived her. And she has this inscription on it. Well, I can't find it, but basically it was, they were rewarded by heaven for good life lived on earth. And then she's buried there too, and she's on the other side. And there's her little marker, complete with a misspelling of the pronominal adjective. Hers doesn't have an apostrophe, really. But hers was a mind that knew no wrong. Hers was a tongue that spoke no evil. Who is this? This is Sallie's granddaughter, born in 1900, daughter of John Wesley Hunt, who worked for the New York World, which is the paper by that famous guy that is in Citizen Kane, the Citizen Kane himself, but different name. Hearst, right, you worked for Hearst. Here she is in 1918 at a garden party at in the court in London, you know, where the king and queen are. And she's wearing a dress made from the train of her grandmother's dress that she wore in 1853 or so when she was presented at court in London. Here she is. She was born Ruth Hunt. She took the stage name Diana Bourbon. And she has in her right hand a stopwatch. She is in a sound booth at a radio station in Los Angeles, and she is directing a radio play. She was in charge of the Burns and Allen show. She was in charge of Hollywood Hotel. All these were very, you know, nationally known in the 1930s. She had earlier been an actress in London. Whoops. Oh, well, I think that was the end. But she had a whole career. I wrote a chapter about her. I could have written the book, except I didn't quite have enough material. But she had the independent spirit that Sallie had. Now, I need to say, I can try to answer questions. I always dread questions because I never really know the answer. Yes.
I'm going to bring the microphone around to anyone who has a question, but we have a few that are online that I want to start with since they can't ask him after, since they're online. So here's a yes or no question for you, Randy. One of our online attendees says, I visited Ward Hall in Georgetown several times. Progress is coming along nicely. Have you toured it?
Yes, at least twice. I'll be speaking there in a couple of weeks for the Scott County Historical Society. And that was built by Junius Ward, brother to Sallie's father.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to walk over to you and ask this other question really quickly. Do any Ward descendants still live in Louisville? We've talked about some of Sallie's descendants and some of her husband's descendants, but do any Ward descendants live in Louisville? And what now stands where their mansion used to be?
There, I can answer the second a little bit more easily. I talk about that in the book. It lasted until about 1915. It was for a while a bus station or a taxi office for cabs. And there was an apartment building. Oh yeah, it was an apartment building before that with all the latest modern things like telephones. But I don't know. I have met some Wards tonight here. But otherwise, I didn't think there were any. But there were no descendants directly from Sallie, as far as I know.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm one of the people who gets to talk about Sallie Ward's portrait at the Speed Museum. And one of the things I'm interested in is her other husbands. You talked quite a bit about the man she divorced, who clearly wasn't worth her time. What about the others?
That is to say, what about her other husbands? I meant to say this about her third husband, the one she married for money. When I have a friend that I just discovered last year who lives in Paris, Kentucky, where I live, who was from Louisville originally, and he's descended from that third husband. The son of that third husband, when he found out that he had been cut out of the will and all the money given to Sallie, tried to kill his father, but failed. But then the father died anyway from some mysterious illness less than a year into the marriage. I imagine that she was extremely happy with her last husband because he was a courtly gentleman. He used to have been, before he got really wealthy, a merchant of clothing, of cloth, and he would come to Sallie's house when she was growing up, or maybe later, and say, "Feel this cloth." And he would go to New York every year to buy cloth, and he knew about the feel of it, and that the feel of the fabric was very important. And so he would kneel, and she would feel the fabric, and then later he's her husband. But you know, he moved up in the world, and his descendants are here. And there was a fire alarm. They lived at the Galt House, and there was a fire alarm, and so everyone had to go downstairs. And she comes down the stairs with her, what's his name? Mr. Downs, George Downs, and people are saying, well, he's walking awfully slowly, and I say, she addresses him as military title, I forget, not general, something short of that. She says, I never hurry the general. Oh, well, there is, you'll see it in the book, there is his son from his first marriage, because his first wife died, you're talking about George Downs. His son wrote a poem that's in the Filson archives that makes fun of Sallie. Yeah, and it ends this way. Next, she married old booze drunk. He goes through each husband. And that would be Armstrong. And never let him sober, robbed his children of their fortune, and lived in clover. Silks and diamonds, coach and horses, she cuts quite a great swell, while poor old booze is squealing in hell. Then the gallant major, that's Mr. Downs, Major Downs. Then the gallant major is decoyed to her parlors. He is married in a jiffy and parted from his dollars. That thus in 1896 she dies of stomach ulcers. Death snatched her away from this mortal shore. St. Peter saw her coming and quickly slammed the door. The devil swore a mighty oath he'd be damned if he'd abide her. Death, greatly puzzled, knew not where to hide her. So she incessantly wanders with ghosts and warlocks fell, rejected by heaven and refused by hell. So that is the impression of a man who thought he was being, squandered out of his inheritance. But more questions? Yes.
What were her views on slavery? And was she involved at all in the suffrage movement?
No, I don't think she was, but she would have been ripe for that. She was, however, a unionist. And when the war came and her Dr. Robert Pearson Hunt, who had a medical degree from Paris, France, but never practiced because he didn't need to, he was so wealthy. But then he lost all his money. And he, well, it's not because he lost his money, that was after the war, but he fought as a surgeon for the South. And she wrote Mary Todd Lincoln in 1864, I think, to ask, could she have her piano and white satin chairs moved up from New Orleans to Louisville? And Mrs. Lincoln, whom she must have known, then asked her husband, who quickly wrote a note to someone, please take care of this, and it was taken care of. So because Lincoln said in his letter, she has been known as a staunch unionist. And I have absolute faith in her. So the difference in her second marriage. Oh, one more thing. The sad fate of her second husband anticipates the sad fate of her son. Her son, her second husband went to Chicago. Apparently they split up. This is 1867 or so, and tries to make a living as a doctor there, but either falls out when he's dead drunk, or jumps from a window and lands on the sidewalk and dies. And his son, John Wesley Hunt, the father of Diana Bourbon, of Ruth Hunt, definitely jumped over the rail of a ship on Christmas Day in 1911, returning from England to America, and was drowned. So he probably knew his father had done something like that. It was very weird and strange.
All right, it's about 7 o'clock, so to be aware of the weather and everyone's safety getting home, we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much, Randy, for coming out tonight. We appreciate your time, and thanks everyone for visiting the Filson.